Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to another edition of Intuitive Angling. And man, I really appreciate you guys checking the video out, making some time to watch it. It's always much appreciated. Got a fun little video for you guys today. We are going to go back through time, and I'm going to talk about the number one lure in each decade back to the 1970s. So we're going to go over the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, and show you what the best lure for that decade was, and you know why it was so successful, and what maybe we can learn from that a little bit. So I think it's going to be an interesting video here. Also guys, real quick, I just wanted to remind you of our Tackle Warehouse Black Friday sale. I'll put my Tackle Warehouse Black Friday sale link in the description if you guys want to get into some of the really good deals they have over the month of November and December. It's got a really good discounts and everything, specials every week. So I'll put my link in the description on that. You guys want to check that out. So much appreciated. Okay guys, let's start out here. I'm going to start out with the 70s, work our way up to the current day, let you know what the dominant lure of that decade was. So we'll start out with the 70s. And the most dominant lure in the 70s was the old Whopper Stopper Hellbender. This is probably, a lot of you newer guys probably don't know much about it. If you look guys into any old timers tackle box, somebody that had a tackle box in the 60s and the 70s, I can promise you, you'll see this bait right there in it, the old Hellbender. You guys have heard me talk about this a bunch on the channel because this was the lure that my dad and all of his friends that I grew up fishing with, this is what they fished a lot when they went, and caught a bunch of big fish on it. This was sort of like it's like an early predecessor to the modern crankbait is basically what it is. It's got a little spinner on the back of it, wobbles down like this. There's 3 different sizes, but there's something about this, guys. The big fish hit it. I can tell you right now, if I saw you guys that have watched the channel, you hear me talking about it all the time. This was the dominant lure back in the 1970s for sure. Everybody had them. Everybody caught a lot of fish on them, and I don't know why nobody uses it anymore, but 70s, that's what it was. Okay, for the 80s, no doubt, without a doubt, 100% true, the number one lure in the 80s was the jig and the old pork frog. Not the plastic trailers we have deal, but the old school pork frog. Guys, the 80s was dominated by the jig and the pork frog like this. There was a period back from about 1984 to about 1985 where I was winning a lot of tournaments locally here. And guys, this is the only bait I threw. I had my flipping stick, I had 30-pound test mono on it, and I had a half-ounce jig with the pork frog on it. And that's where I fished, that's what I fished everywhere I went like that. This was absolutely, from about 1980 up until about 1990, the number one lure out there. People, when they were fishing a jig, they had a jig and pork frog on it. And that was back when flipping was really at the top of its domination during the 80s. So if you were flipping flooded cover or just whatever, you had a jig and pork frog tied on in the 80s for sure. Now the 90s, a little bit of a transition. The 90s, in my opinion, was dominated. The era number one lure was the square bill balsa crankbait, like this Bagley Balsa 3. This accounted for a ton of tournament wins back in the 90s. It was like, this had been around for a while, since about the 70s, but it was only about in the 1990s that people really started keying in on how effective this bait was. And you started having other tackle manufacturers get into it, and they made different variations of it, different sizes of it, different colors, and it sort of expanded from just the basic 3-inch size that was common back in the day. But the old balsa square bill, number one for sure in the 90s. Now the 2000s, guys, I'm going to put the Senko soft plastic stick bait, whatever you call it is. The Senko in the 2000s dominated. From 2000 to 2010, you saw this constantly, guys. Everybody was fishing a Senko. Fishing at Weightless, fishing at Texas Rig, fishing at Wacky, whatever. It was just, all the fish were getting caught on it. And it's still just as good today. But this is basically back when it started a little bit in 2000. Like 2000s like that. It was just absolutely incredible during that period. Now as the 2010s got here, guys, this is when the modern era of jerkbaits like the Megabass Vision 110 started dominating. The 2010s, when I think about that, I think about the Megabass jerkbaits. It was like, they've been around, the whole Japanese line of jerkbaits started back in the early 2000s, but it wasn't until like the 2010s until, well, it became mainstream and everybody started copying off the Megabass Vision 110 and having their own version of the high-tech Japanese jerk baits with internal balancer systems and all that type of stuff. But absolutely dominated in the 2010s. And also, guys, I'll have my Tackle Warehouse link in the description for all this stuff if you guys want to get some of them too. And finally, guys, for the 2020s we're in right now, that this is the era of the big high-tech swim baits like the Megabass Mag Draft here. Guys, the 2020s, these highly crafted, larger swim baits like this with the paddle tails or different type of tails and different type of hook systems on it have absolutely dominated. Now, there's a lot of different sizes on this. I'm talking about these swim baits like this that range anywhere between, say, 4 inches up to 10 inches. But this has sort of become a cult following a little bit. It's not that they work all the time, because they're highly situational in most aspects, but they're so fun to fish and they catch big fish that we have a preoccupation with these large swim baits like the Megabass Mag Draft in the 2020s, and it still holds on to this day. So anyway, guys, that's the ones for over the course of last 50 years. Hellbender in the 70s, Jig and Pork Frog in the 80s, Squarebill Crankbait in the 90s, the Cinco in the early 2000s, Jerkbait, Megabass 110 2010s, and the big swim baits like the Mag Draft 2020. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk later.